October 15th, 2014, Maria Fuentes goes on social media to rant and blast the cartels for terrorizing her hometown. However, Maria, who was a medical doctor and a mother, soon became their target, and what they did to her next changed the course of her life forever. Here are the before and after stories of people who messed with a Mexican cartel.
Pero a ti, Azucena Uresti, una cosa te hago saber, no seas pendejo y bájale de huevos, porque te aseguro que si no le bajas de huevos y sigues tirándome, te lo aseguro que donde sea que estés, doy contigo, y te haré que te comas tus palabras, aunque me acusen de feminicidio.
A CJNG drug lord gave a chilling threat to one of Mexico's most prominent newscasters, Miss Azucena Uresti, after she spoke out against his cartel. After that video was released, her life was in grave danger. Now, what exactly did she say to piss off one of Mexico's most dangerous criminal organizations? Born March 15th, 1978, 46-year-old Uresti was a Mexican news anchor and journalist. She worked for Milenio Television and Radio Formula. Also, on numerous occasions, she would anchor presidential election debates, leading Mexicans to regard her as one of the top newscasters in the country. However, everything shifted in 2021 when Uresti covered this escalating conflict between the CJNG and a vigilante group in Michoacan's Tierra Caliente region. She revealed that this vigilante group had armed themselves to stand against the cartel, with one member even declaring their willingness to kill any challengers. The CJNG didn't take kindly to that and decided to send Uresti a clear warning.
Yo, representante del Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, me dirijo directamente a Noticia Milenio. No estoy en contra de la libertad de expresión, pero sí del quien me tira a mí directamente, porque les están agarrando dinero a las autodefensas.
On August 9th, 2021, a video surfaces on Twitter showing masked men holding firearms. In the blurry footage, a man claiming to represent Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the leader of CJNG, criticized Uresti and Milenio Television for alleged bias in their reporting. He further accused Uresti of accepting bribes from local gangs in Michoacan in return for favorable coverage and to personally attack him on air. He would also claim that these vigilante groups were, in fact, drug traffickers, kidnappers, and extortionists, making a solid point that only a criminal organization could afford the military-grade equipment those forces possessed.
No creo que el gobierno no se dé cuenta que no son autodefensas por el tipo de armamento que traen y porque me mandan a hacer monstruos que salen alrededor de $100,000, precio que es incompetente para cualquier autodefensa.
And finally, he swore that if Uresti kept being biased against them, he was going to make her eat her words. It was a huge threat, and the video instantly went viral. Given the track record of journalists in Mexico, everyone began fearing Uresti would join the list of over 120 Mexican journalists killed in the past 20 years. But that's okay because Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the Mexican president, stated at a press conference his willingness to protect her.
I completely reject these threats. We don't accept this sort of behavior. We're going to protect Azucena. We're going to protect all Mexicans. It is our responsibility.
Yeah, those words meant absolutely nothing, given that the government's track record for protecting journalists is pretty horrible. Nonetheless, Uresti wasn't harmed. She even talked about the threats during her broadcast on Milenio Television later that day.
I have joined the federal system of protection from the government. I repeat, our work will continue to be based on the truth and with the intention of providing information on the reality of a country like ours.
Now, right now, she's safe, and no other threats have been made. However, when it comes to reporting on cartels, I'd say they got a little more diplomatic. It's October 19th, 2021. Mexican journalist Armando Linares Lopez was writing up notes for an interview when his cell phone would buzz with an unknown number. He picked up that call, and the voice he heard uttered these words. "This is Commander Eagle. I'm from the Jalisco New Generation Cartel." And it was at that moment he knew something tragic was about to occur. Armando Lopez ran an online news website in a small Mexican city called Zitácuaro, located in the hills of Michoacan. Armando grew up in this city and had lived most of his life there. However, around the early 2000s, it became a hub for cartel activity. Now, the cartels loved the soil here for the growth of marijuana and opium poppy fields. Michoacan has also become a hub for the shipment of fentanyl and meth around Mexico and into the U.S. Now, Armando had an innate talent for journalism, and his career as a journalist took off just as the drug trade in Mexico began to surge. And like many others in the country, he witnessed the most horrifying consequences and became convinced that bringing about change required more extensive media coverage from Mexicans. So in response, he and a group of friends launched a news platform called Monitor Michoacan in 2019. But little did he know that this would become the beginning of a very troubled life. They published big reports centered around the drug trade and shady police officers. Soon enough, they would become a favorite amongst the locals. But on the other hand, they became a target for Mexican cartels. Now, Armando and his friends understood the risk of being journalists in Mexico, so they focused more on corrupt officials than cartel hitmen. Yet this was still a problem because those cartels needed law enforcement on their side for their operations to run smoothly. And one of their biggest stories covered a corrupt, high-profile officer who worked for the CJ&G. And after that story got published, a commander of that cartel wanted to speak with him, taking us back to that phone call. After Commander Eagle introduced himself, he immediately got to the heart of the matter. He told Monitor Michoacan to quit criticizing the local government and the prosecutor's office. Armando cut in, insisting that his outlet remained impartial, only documenting events as they occurred. However, Commander Eagle wasn't interested in arguing. He delivered his message, warned Armando that they would speak again, and then ended the call. 2 weeks later, Armando was at home when a second call came in, this time with a much more direct message on WhatsApp. You were told to stop trashing the government. I'm trying to be your friend, but if I can, you're gonna have problems with us. Stop trashing the prosecutor. Any man would be terrified when reading this, but Armando for some reason told no one, not even his wife. He continued his investigations, publishing stories as he always did. And right now, you're probably thinking the cartel wanted him dead, right? Well, for some reason, they didn't. Commander Eagle chose to be lenient with Armando, opting to extort him for money rather than taking his life. Eagle reached out to Armando, demanding a 20,000 peso monthly fee. Armando, knowing that if he disagreed to this he'd be killed, settled for a one-time payment of 500,000 pesos, roughly $25,000. He and his friends now realized that they were trapped in the same kind of extortion scheme that they had spent years reporting on. But it was the only way to remain safe. So Armando and his wife withdrew money from their savings, and some of the staff set up a collection from friends. They agreed on the location and handed the money over to Eagle's squad. Armando was now free, and there was nothing else to stop him. However, once you start dealing with cartels, there's no going back. And for Armando, this was only the beginning of his end. In December 2021, a Facebook account shared Armando's WhatsApp profile picture, showing him alongside a woman. Now, this woman was recognized as a relative of a leader from Carteles Unidos, a group opposing Commander Eagle's faction. Now, this led to the perception that Armando might be aligned with him, marking him as an adversary to Commander Eagle. So the commander and his men would set into motion the operation to not only kill Armando, but also to take the life of his friends. And after attacking their office and killing one of Armando's friends named Toledo, Armando knew that he was next. And truly, he was. March 15th, 2022. Armando parked his car outside his home. A man in a black suit with a red tie approaches him. After a brief handshake and a conversation, they both entered Armando's apartment. Roughly 5 minutes later, neighbors saw the suited man sprinting out of that apartment. The details of that conversation, the identity of that man, and the moment he drew his hidden gun remain a mystery. Now, what's known is that the police later discovered Armando's lifeless body, riddled with 8 bullets, in his living room. His death occurred exactly 43 days after his friend Toledo was killed. Gasiola went on a mission to arrest cartel members, but instead of slapping on handcuffs, he decided to help himself to their stash of cocaine. I mean, it seems like he took the saying, taking a bite out of crime, a little too literally, but wait till you hear what happened to him next. In 2023, Kevin Gasiola was a newly graduated Mexican police officer from the police academy in Tijuana, and as part of his first assignments, he had some drug shipment busts. However, the team of officers he was assigned to turned out to be corrupt, and they unanimously devised a plan to steal the drug shipment from the warehouse they were stored in during that raid. The operation was successful, but a couple of hours later, it fell apart. Surveillance camera captures a pickup truck belonging to the Mexican police pulling out of the building with big plastic-wrapped bales of cocaine. After that information came to light, suspected cartel members started calling up law enforcement demanding their shipment back or facing some serious consequences. It was confirmed that the shipment did belong to the Sinaloa cartel, the infamous faction run by Ismael El Mayo Zambada. When Gasiola and his associates failed to return that shipment, Sinaloa sicarios launched a fierce attack on law enforcement. They riddled the federal prosecutor's office in Tijuana with at least 30 bullets, leaving that building looking scarred. An hour later, an officer allegedly involved in that operation was shot dead on a street in Tijuana. 4 days after that, gunmen unleashed a hail of bullets at the state prosecutor's office. 3 days later, a state detective was killed in his car while refueling at a gas station in Tijuana. Now every other officer involved, including Gasiola, ran into hiding. Now here's the crazy part. No one knows exactly what these officers did with that stolen shipment, but it did seem like they shared it amongst themselves cause Kevin Gasiola, who was just so unfortunate to find himself in that situation, was abducted, tortured, and murdered on the street of Tijuana. When his body was found, it was next to another man named El Tommy, who authorities say was part of the rival cartel that brought in the stolen cocaine. So straight out of the academy to joining an operation to steal from the Sinaloa cartel, Kevin Gasiola lost his life in one of the worst ways imaginable. October 15, 2014, Maria del Rosario Fuentes Rubio was kidnapped by armed men as she was leaving the Tierra Santa Clinic in Reynosa, where she worked as a doctor. To others, her abduction came as a shock, but to Maria, it was the consequence of her actions toward Mexican cartels. Dr. Maria was rarely seen without her phone, while her friends, colleagues, and family often assumed that she was addicted to her device. The truth was far more complex. It was her gateway to another world. To most, Dr. Maria Fuentes was a 36-year-old general practitioner and mother living in the border city of Reynosa, Mexico. But on Twitter, or X, she was an anonymous citizen journalist operating under the alias @Miut3, and using a Catwoman avatar, she reported on cartel violence in her city. Now, she also managed a popular news platform called Valor por Tamaulipas, which means bravery for Tamaulipas. This platform had a substantial social media presence, boasting over 500,000 followers on Facebook. On this site, you saw pictures of cartel members, missing persons alerts, and reports of cartel crimes. On Twitter, she urged people to stand up and speak out against violence. February 2013, Sicario started handing out flyers, offering a $45,000 reward for anyone who could provide info on the identity of this administrator for Valor por Tamaulipas. Even on Twitter, they would threaten Maria, warning her to take down these posts. Now, given that they couldn't link her social media presence to her real life, Maria couldn't care any less about the threats until, somehow, in some way, those cartel hitmen finally cracked her identity. Now, after she was located and kidnapped, her social media pages went silent. Then on October 16th, the tone of her tweets completely changed. At this time, the abductors had already taken her life but decided to post her death on her social media pages as a warning. They posted a tweet that read, "Friends and family, my real name is Maria del Rosario Fuentes Rubio. I'm a doctor, and today my life has come to an end." Then they posted two photos, the first of Maria looking into the camera, and the second showing Maria laying on the ground with a bullet wound in her head. Another tweet warned others not to make the same mistakes. "Shut down your accounts. Don't risk your family's lives as I have done. I ask your forgiveness." It was horrible, to say the least, but those gruesome tweets did nothing more than amplify the belief that speaking against Mexican cartels, whether online or in person, can get you killed. We are hostages to extortion demands. We are hostages of criminal groups. Charging extortion payments has practically become the national sport in Tamaulipas. Those were the words of Julio Almanza during a TV interview in Tamaulipas. However, these words struck a nerve amongst top cartel members, leading them to make an example out of him. Now, before crossing the cartel, Julio was a businessman in Tamaulipas and led the state's Mexican Business Chamber Federation just across the Texas border. He lived an ordinary life until he took a stand against the cartel's extortion. For years, the cartel had been extorting small businesses in Mexico, with some owners even kidnapped until payments were made. And when those demands weren't met, the consequences were pretty grim. But the situation escalated when cartels started targeting multi-million-dollar corporations. In July 2024, FEMSA, the company behind OXXO, Mexico's biggest convenience store chain, revealed that it was shutting down 191 of its stores and 7 gas stations in Nuevo Laredo, a border city, because of ongoing cartel extortions. FEMSA, which is also the largest soft drink bottler in Latin America and publicly traded on the Mexican Stock Exchange, has been targeted by the Northeast Cartel, a successor of the Zetas cartel. The company reported it had been struggling with cartel demands for years, including being forced to purchase fuel from specific distributors and facing attempts to control the sale, distribution, and pricing of certain products. At one point, Northeast Cartel sicarios kidnapped 2 store employees, forcing them to act as lookouts and provide information for the cartel. Since these stores in Mexico are a convenience, the cartel sees them as great fronts to keep tracks on police, soldiers, and rivals. Now, the news of FEMSA closing its store pissed off a lot of Mexicans, making Almanza speak up for himself and his people. But like we already said, his comments didn't sit well with a few cartel members. And less than 24 hours later, he was attacked. July 30th, 2024, Julio Almanza was shot dead right outside his office in the city of Matamoros. His death was tragic, but the message was clear. No one crosses the cartel and escapes untouched. Much like the previous story, businesswoman Mima Perez was killed for speaking out against cartel extortion. However, her execution was even more bizarre. After earning her public accounting degree from UABC, Mima Perez started working in the fishing industry. In 2002, she completed a master's and initiated a project to promote new fish species in Mexico. By the next year, she secured the first commercial permit for these species in the Gulf of California, and in 2010, obtained the first water certification in the area. With family funds, she established a marine products facility. A decade later, Perez became the head of Baja California's Fish Industry Chamber. But this wonderful success would bring her into contact with cartel drug lords. In 2024, during a press conference, Perez expressed concerns that illegally caught seafood was being sold alongside legal products in the same markets. She highlighted that these illegal operations bypass production costs and ignore environmental regulations, such as net size limits designed to protect endangered species like sea turtles. So in July 2024, she began investigating the cartel's extortion of local fishers. And like Almanza, whom we discussed earlier, she openly criticized sicarios for exploiting those who had dedicated their lives to the marine industry, taking away what little profit they earned. And if you're wondering how Mexican cartels are connected to the fishing industry, well, it's crucial to understand that they do wield significant power along the coast, largely due to that smuggling operation by the sea. And unfortunately, Mima Perez's bold comments didn't sit well with certain cartel members, which led to her tragic death. She was gunned down in the port city of Ensenada just hours after speaking out. And when we say they took their time in filling up her body with bullets, we mean it. Julio shared the same last name as the infamous Beltran-Leyva brothers, founders of the Beltran-Leyva organization, but surprisingly, he had no connection to them. Yet, somehow, his life eventually became tragically entangled with cartels in the most horrific way imaginable. So before this, Julio was simply a member of the Mexican music band Los Ciclones del Arroyo. He joined this group in the 1990s when they gained recognition for their contributions to the norteño music genre, known for their traditional regional Mexican sound featuring instruments like the accordion and bajo sexto. Their music often reflects the rural and working class experiences in Mexico. And although they never achieved mainstream fame, they have maintained a loyal fan base especially within the regional music scene in Mexico. However, in recent years, the violence against Mexican musicians from narco-corridos bands has escalated, and there's a huge reason why. And just in case you didn't know, narco-corrido is a genre of Mexican music that grew out of the norteño folk corrido tradition. Corridos have been telling stories about life and death in Mexico since the Mexican Revolution, and these songs usually highlight the exploits of drug traffickers, set to the beat of traditional Mexican rhythms. And not so surprisingly, Mexico's brutal cartel war finds its voice in these controversial drug ballads, which often celebrate the violent lives and gruesome deaths of Mexican drug lords. Now, Julio just so happened to be another name in the book of musicians who have suffered from this violence. April 2012, Julio was performing solo at a party in the Mexican state of Sinaloa when a group of people, suspected of being cartel members, ordered him to perform a specific song. Julio refused, and once that party was over, they kidnapped him. The men would take him in an SUV to this isolated location, where they brutally tortured him for hours before shooting him in the leg. Later that day, they dumped him along the highway, where passerby found him almost bleeding to death. He was rushed to the hospital, and luckily, he made it out alive. Unlike this next narco-corrido singer, who paid the ultimate price for pushing the limits with his lyrics. Now, when you talk about the narco-corrido genre of music, the name Chalino Sanchez will always be remembered as one of the greats, but also one of the first to pay the ultimate price for his art. Sanchez was born on a small ranch called Las Flechas in El Guayabo, a rural municipality in Sinaloa. His given name was Rosalino, but he chose to go by Chalino, as the other one sounded too feminine. He grew up as the youngest of 8 siblings in a life marked by poverty. So in 1975, at just 15 years old, Chalino faced a traumatic event when his sister was abducted and brutally assaulted by multiple men, who then sent her home naked. Driven by the need for revenge, Chalino tracked down and killed one of the perpetrators at a party. This act made him a wanted man, forcing him to flee Mexico and start anew in LA, California. There he joined his brother in dealing small amounts of cocaine, but within months he was arrested and deported back to Mexico, where he served an 18-month sentence. Now, during his time in prison, Chalino began writing narco-corrido songs, which glorified the lives of drug traffickers. While controversial, this unique style garnered him a lot of attention, even within the confines of his cell. Once he got out, he went back to LA, hired a band, and started recording music, performing at various venues across the city. And by the mid-1980s, Chalino became a well-known name in both Mexico and California. However, his music, which celebrated the lives of drug lords, did make him a target for their rivals. Despite several attempts on his life, though, Chalino knew that it was only a matter of time before those drug lords would come after him. May 15, 1992. Despite warnings from his loved ones and even receiving many death threats, Chalino performed at Salón Buganvillas in Culiacán. During the performance, a fan pushes through the crowd and hands him what seemed like a song request. However, from Chalino's reaction, it was clear that this note was a death threat. The fear on his face was evident, but he continued singing. After the concert, he left with his 2 brothers, a cousin, and several young women. On their way home, they'd be stopped by armed men in Chevrolet Suburbans who claimed to be police. But one of the men flashed a badge and told Chalino, "My commander needs you." Chalino and his brothers attempted to bribe the men, as it wasn't uncommon for Mexican police to accept money in exchange for leniency, but their offer was rejected. Chalino surrendered to the men and was taken away. 12 hours later, they found his body in a ditch with rope marks on his wrists and 2 gunshot wounds to the back of the head.
News about the shooting of 2 Americans south of the U.S. border in Mexico. One immigration and customs enforcement agent killed, another wounded.
Jaime Jorge Zapata happened to work for ICE, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which kinda made him a prime target for Mexican cartels. Born in Brownsville, Texas, a border city just north of Matamoros, Mexico, Zapata followed in the footsteps of his 5 brothers, pursuing a career in criminal justice after earning his degree from the University of Texas. He began as a border patrol agent before joining ICE's Homeland Security investigations in 2006, where he worked in the human trafficking and smuggling unit. Now, Zapata was just a normal U.S. agent living in Mexico and didn't directly cross paths with any cartel, yet his job naturally placed him at odds with them.
They were traveling alone through an area controlled by the Zetas, an especially ruthless drug cartel.
Both agents work for the U.S. Embassy here in Mexico City.
On February 15, 2011, Zapata and a colleague, Victor Avila, were traveling from Laredo, Texas to Mexico City on an ICE assignment. And as they drove through the northern state of San Luis Potosí, they noticed two SUVs tailing them. One SUV sped past aggressively, while the other opened fire, forcing them off the road. When Avila rolled down the window to identify themselves as U.S. diplomats, a hitman approached and shot him at point-blank range. Zapata fought back as one of the gunmen tried to drag him out of the car. Both agents pled with the attackers, around 15 of them, but they would continue firing. A Mexican federal police helicopter eventually arrived, finding Avila wounded with 2 gunshots to the leg. Tragically, Zapata, who had been shot 3 times, succumbed to his injuries before receiving medical treatment. After the arrests, 2 of the gunmen tried to claim they mistook the agents for rivals, but that excuse quickly fell apart, and here's why. The ambush took place at a fake military checkpoint, with gunmen decked out in camouflage and wielding machine guns. Plus, it was impossible for them not to know that Zapata and his colleague were U.S. agents. The diplomatic plates on their car made it clear. Yet, they still launched that attack, leaving no doubt that Zapata was targeted because of his job. Like many teenagers in Mexico's impoverished regions, Juan Francisco Silas-Rocha dreamt of a quick path to wealth, leading him to take some risky steps of aligning with drug trafficking organizations. However, it all backfired. Now, following Javier Arellano Felix's arrest in 2006, his nephew, Fernando Sanchez Arellano, known as El Ingenierio, took over the Arellano Felix cartel. Under El Ingenierio's command, Silas-Rocha rose from a minor position to a highly influential lieutenant, overseeing cells involved in drug trafficking, violent clashes with rival cartels, kidnappings, and numerous murders. Under his leadership, the cartel generated millions of dollars, giving Silas-Rocha the wealth and power he craved so deeply. He would continue his work for the cartel until he got cocky. February 2011, Silas-Rocha directed the killings of 2 people in California as revenge for the suspected abduction and murder of one of his drug couriers. Now, the California Department of Justice, with the help of a confidential informant, managed to record phone conversations and organize controlled meetings with Silas-Rocha and his accomplices. This crucial information was relayed to the Mexican government, leading to Silas-Rocha's arrest. Yet even behind bars, he felt untouchable, brazenly boasting to authorities that he had ordered the killings of over 30 men each month. He was able to maintain his deadly influence because he still enjoyed a degree of freedom within these prison walls. However, once extradited to the U.S., all that power, all that bravado, came to an abrupt end. And if you're wondering about the before and after here, it's simple. He should have never joined a Mexican cartel in the first place.